Welcome everybody to Africa Talks. Our 18th edition is supported by the German Africa Foundation in Berlin. Africa Talks is, as you might know, designed as a digital platform for exchange of African and European topics, exchange of knowledge and ideas between journalists and experts from civil society from both continents. We have to talk about chances and challenges, about different realities, and we want to learn, engage, and discuss. I'm Marco Vollmer. I'm a member of the board of the IJP, the International Journalist Programs, and I would like to introduce my co-host of today, Sabine Odhiambo.
Yes, hello, my name is Sabine Odhiambo. I'm the Secretary General of the German Africa Foundation and very happy to co-host together with Marco Vollmer this edition of Africa Talks.
Thank you, Sabine. Our topic of today, or for today, towards a comprehensive strategy for Africa and the EU, challenges, expectations, and opportunities for the 6th AU-EU Summit. The 6th AU, African Union and European Union Summit will take place in Brussels on this Thursday and Friday of this week. Originally scheduled for 2020 and postponed due to the pandemic, the summit aims to set the framework for reshaping Africa-Europe relations for the next 6 years. These have recently proved rather difficult. Unequal access to vaccines, production in Africa, or the reaction of European countries to the discovery of the Omicron variant by South African scientists are just a few examples that have strained the relationship between Africa and Europe in recent months. At the same time, the EU is competing with the growing influence and engagement of other actors, such as China, Russia, or Turkey on the African continent. And where do relations between the African Union and the European Union stand ahead of the 6th summit? What expectations do both sides have of the summit? These and other important questions we want to raise and we want to discuss with our distinguished guests of today.
Yeah, and we would like to first of all welcome Lidet Tadesse, who is Associate Director, Peaceful Societies and Accountable Governance, and a member of the European Center for Development Policy Management, ECDPM. She focuses on geopolitics, peace and security, conflict prevention, and peace building, particularly in African peace and security issues, the African Union and its partnerships with the EU and China, but also in governance and peace and security management under the AU, Africa and multilateralism, and the geopolitics of the Horn of Africa. Prior to joining ECDPM, Lidet worked as an independent peace building and advocacy consultant advisor with a variety of civil society organizations in the Horn of Africa. And she has also worked as a policy advisor for the Horn of Africa regional program of the Life and Peace Institute. Welcome.
Dr. Christoph Hoffmann has been a member of the German Bundestag since 2017, and he has already been a guest in our first Africa Talks edition 1 year ago. He is Vice Chairman of the Parliamentary Committee on Economic Cooperation and Development, and he is member of the board of the German Africa Foundation. After studying forestry at the University of Freiburg, and passing the state examination in 1985, he worked for over 15 years as a forester with a focus on forest management and timber sales. From 2007 till 2017, he was mayor of the community of Bad Bellingen, a small city in the southwest of Germany. He describes his position in development cooperation as follows: enhance more multilateral programs instead of using bilateral approaches to miss global targets. Bilateral approaches should focus on health, basic education, especially education for women. Free and fair trade is the motor for prosperity, and good governance must be a condition for development cooperation. Welcome to our talk, to Africa Talks, Dr. Hoffmann.
Thank you for having me on the show.
And last but not least, we have Dr. Olumide Abimbola, who's the founder and director of APRI, the Africa Policy Research Institute. His areas of focus include economic informality, trade policy, regional integration, and natural resources management. And before APRI, he worked at the Koch Support Unit, a GIZ-hosted G7 initiative funded by the German government and the European Commission. Prior to that, he worked on trade and regional integration at the African Development Bank, focusing especially on continental projects. Dr. Abimbola holds a PhD from the Max Planck Institute for Social Anthropology in Halle, Saale, Germany, and a master's degree in development studies from Uppsala University in Sweden. Welcome also to you.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
So you see, it's quite an interesting group of panelists, of guests, which we have invited for today's talk. We would also like to let you know that our colleague Wiebke Koch, she is not visible here in this talk, is a graphic recorder, and she will take graphical notes of this talk, which you can check and see after the talk on the website of the German Africa Foundation, also on the website of the IJP, of the International Journalists Programs. But now let's kick off our discussion, and I would like to start with Dr. Hoffmann. What are your expectations about the AU-EU summit starting Thursday in Brussels?
It's a good sign. It's happening. We have been waiting too long for it. And the relations between Europe and Africa are heterogeneous, like the whole continent is heterogeneous. Africa is not a country, Africa is a continent. We have so many different situations there, so many different stages of development there. We have different conflicts ongoing and so forth. So the relations between the Europeans and the African countries is difficult to describe because we have a lot of bilateral relations ongoing. And so the common European politics versus Africa has not been really developed yet. We have now a new approach with the European Gateway project. So this is something really big now, and we've been waiting for it for long. And it's also an answer to the Belt and Road Initiative from China. So what you see, like you said before, there's many more actors in the field of economic development in Africa now, with Russia, with China, with Turkey. And this is sort of a competition. And competition is always good when it comes to development. And so it's also for all the African countries, they have a choice. And hopefully they have a good choice when Europe makes a good offer. And hopefully the summit will contribute to this good offer of Europe, because I'm convinced that the European approach to human rights, to freedom and democracy is the right way for Africa in the long run. It might be once in a while good for African countries to decide themselves for something else, because they see a short-term development which might be lucrative or might be tempting. But in the long run, I'm convinced the only stable system will be a liberal democracy in Africa. And we see a new young generation upcoming in Africa with a lot of knowledge. So they will have new constitutions in Africa. I'm convinced of that. So we will see a new age in Africa upcoming, and that will influence the summit already, because the leaders of Africa said, let's no longer talk, let's get into action. And the new relations between Africa and Europe, hopefully, would be a more family approach. So we are all in one family, and we have these family members. Some are stronger, some are smaller, some are younger, some are older, but we're all together, and this is important. And hopefully this the summit will have such a good result that we can work on from this.
Allow me one additional question, Dr. Hoffmann. As an experienced politicians, you have a feeling about such an important summit as you have already mentioned. And what is your personal feeling about? Will it be a success?
It's difficult to answer because the result is in the future. So hopefully there will be more. I think Europe has learned that we need Africa. So this has changed the game. Before that, it was more paternal relationship. It was the donors Europeans were the donors and the Africans were the takers. And I think this is over because we need Africa. We need their biodiversity. We need their natural resources. We are an old continent. We need the young workforce from Africa, and so forth and so forth. So we need Africa. So this is a new approach. So this is really eye level now. And before that, it wasn't that. It was not possible to have an eye level because one was the giving and the other was taking and so forth. But now I think it's very clear. Like Germany, when you look at the energy sector, we're so dependent on Russian gas. We're so dependent on oil from Saudi Arabia and so forth. But we need a lot more friends to have the resources of alternative fossil fuel-free energy as an import to Germany. So this is a huge game changer, which is upcoming.
Yeah, Ms. Tadesse, Dr. Hoffmann has stated we need no longer talk, we need more action. And you also in your recent article, you argued that, and I quote, EU-AU summits tend to be impressive on verbal commitments, creative in coining adjectives to qualify the partnership, generous in identifying points of convergence in principle, and photogenic on camera, yet underwhelming in yielding tangible results. So what expectations, according to you, do both sides have of the summit, and how would you assess the summit's prospects of actually laying the foundation for a new strategic partnership as envisioned? And what concrete results or outputs would the summit have to deliver in order to achieve this?
Yeah, thanks, Sabine. I think the expectations of the two sides from the summit are a bit diversified or differentiated. I think there's an understanding from both sides that it's good that they are able now to convene together to deliberate on some of the most challenging political, economic, and other topics that are of importance to them. But I think the anticipation from the European side and the anticipation from the African side, the way I see it is differentiated. I think there's a lot more excitement from Brussels, partly because it is the host of the summit, but also in its own assessment of where the partnership is. As Dr. Hoffmann also mentioned, the EU's assessment of the salience of Africa on the European agenda, I think, has changed over time, whereas the African side, I think, is still maybe lukewarmly welcoming the excitement from the European side for various reasons. So having said that the expectations are diversified or differentiated, I think from the EU side, the idea or the expectation is that the summit would provide a platform where the two sides could discuss elevating the partnership to some sort of alliance. So to some sort of Europe, Africa, or EU-AU alliance. And I think there's also a desire from the European side to also, talk about some major flagship projects and sort of woo the African side towards strengthening the partnership. And this also, I think, the idea of wooing or the idea of announcing several flagship projects aligns very well with what Dr. Hoffmann said, and I also mentioned, about Europe's assessment of how the partnership with Africa is quite significant for Europe for several reasons, including Europe's projection of itself globally. So Europe's geopolitical role is also strongly intertwined with its partnership, with its influence, with its political influence, security influence, and economic influence and partnership with Africa. So there's that understanding. From the African side, I think, a bit more wait and see, and let's see what the summit delivers sort of sentiment. I think there has also been primarily, or at least the thing that has brought it home, not that this was unique or a new idea, but the thing that has brought it home, I think, is the COVID response. And there's a lot more disappointment from the African side on how the collaboration didn't actually hold, or the partnership didn't actually hold when it came to the response to COVID. This was seen in accessing PPE. This was seen in accessing vaccines. Still is seen in accessing vaccines, and then also conversations around IP waivers have not been as constructive and as positive and as well as welcoming as the African side would have expected from a partnership of equals. Let's say, I personally don't necessarily think this is a partnership of equal, but the EU keeps on framing it as such. And so when the rhetoric or when the narrative doesn't really hold to reality, I think the disappointment is much deeper or much more tangible than when there hasn't been any narratives or when there hasn't been any advertisements of the potential of the partnership. So I think the two sides are therefore going into the partnership with different expectations. From the African side, I think it's more let's try to get more yield, or let's try to get more deliverables out of the partnership, but with perhaps a bit more skepticism. I think that's the sentiment with which they are going to Brussels. Of course, there's no question, neither from the African side nor from the European side, but also from analysts, that this is a partnership that has great potentials, but there's also a partnership that struggles to achieve the full potential of the partnership. So I would frame it as such.
If I may, just one short question after that. Would you expect the AU to voice these disappointments at the summit now?
Yes, actually. I mean, well, first off, it will voice it because, for example, I've heard that they have not been able to agree on the draft declaration ahead of the summit, and then negotiations are still going on because they are negotiating on the tone, the terms that are used, the language that is used, and then also the positions that are expressed there. So in a way, this is a positive sign, meaning it tells you that the two sides are not going to shy away from unpacking some politically sensitive questions, and that they are to some extent still committed to having frank conversations. So that is good development. But in general, summits, because they tend to be high level, I mean, this is heads of states convening, and as much as that is positive in terms of being able to discuss the politically sensitive issues, that's also the space where diplomacy reigns. And because of diplomacy, because of processes and protocol and things like that, it is oftentimes you do not get truth, or you do not get very politically sensitive and sort of radically inspiring or radically different positions expressed in these summits. So I think there would be some hints in there in the declarations, but I'm not sure to what extent it would be radically different and then very different from what has been said before.
Thank you.
Dr. Abimbola, do you agree with these inputs given by our other guests, and in which policy areas do you see common grounds on the summit, and where are, from your point of view, the biggest obstacles?
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, yes, I agree with what the previous speakers have said. I think, first of all, that it is important to acknowledge the fact that this is sort of a diplomatic forum, that it exists. It's a really important thing. The relationship between Africa and Europe is important. To both of them, to both Europe and Africa, Europe and Africa have very close ties, even if we don't often think about them, or if we don't often hear them highlighted. There are trade connections between both continents that are strong. European investments on the African continent is still, the highest volume of investment to the continent. Security issues connect both of them. If there's a security issue on one side of, the Mediterranean, there's an issue on the other side. So I think first of all, it's great to just acknowledge that this kind of forum where the heads of state of both sides can meet and talk exists. But we also kind of need to be careful in thinking about what that kind of space can achieve, and Lidet already sort of pointed towards that. It is not a working session. It is two parties agreeing to have a look at their relationship together. We, like Lidet already mentioned, also there's going to be a communique that is released after this, but these things are in any case negotiated ahead. There was a ministerial late last year in which many of the issues that have been discussed this week were already brought up. So I don't think there is, I don't think there's going to be anything super surprising coming up this week. But having said that, I think we also need to think about the obstacles, some of which again have been mentioned here. First of all, Africa is not a country. We've heard from Dr. Hoffmann, but Europe is also not a country. There are 27 countries in Europe, some of whom don't have strong relations to Africa and don't care. The ones that bother to care are some of them you wish they didn't care as much as they did, and some of them have their baggages, historical and some existing baggages. So this sometimes interferes with the relationship between the two continents. So that's one. On the other side, I think sometimes we are not even sure who is speaking for Europe. We know that the Commission is the government of Europe, right? So the Commission is responsible for partnerships and is the one that's responsible for the comprehensive strategy with Africa. But there's also France, which holds the presidency of the Council of the European Union, which has its own ideas of what the relationship should be about on trade and investment, and has a new deal with Africa. The EU Council also has its own new Africa-Europe alliance. So, I'm not saying that this is just the case on the European side. It's also the case on the African side. Africa is a continent of 55 countries, and they also have different ideas of what the relationship should look like. But again, like I said, it's great that this sort of forum exists, but let's not overplay what it could actually deliver, right? So in my opinion, of course, it's possible to have a strategic partnership, with both sides. But I think we're beginning to see now, again, this has been mentioned, that there's an acknowledgement that Europe needs Africa. We haven't heard it strongly enough. We need to hear it more strongly. And I think African partners also want to hear that more strongly, what Europe actually wants from Africa, beyond security, of course, and migration, right? So what does Europe want from Africa? We are not hearing it yet. We're beginning to have an idea of what that might be. The EU Green Deal sort of offers some thoughts around that. So hydrogen has come on the table, renewable energy has come on the table, but we are not seeing enough clarity around that. I think we need that for the relationship to go a bit stronger. So on the chance of the summit itself being a kind of beginning of a new partnership, I'm not that sure. There are tensions. Again, the tensions have been mentioned, and I think we all know these tensions at this point. The central one over the past few years, two years and plus, is the same thing that stopped the summit from happening until now, which is the COVID-19 pandemic. And the reaction of the EU and European countries to the pandemic, the reaction, the way the vaccine issue has been handled, the vaccine hoarding, that's what's been called, the lack of support at multilateral spaces for what Africa and other countries have been asking for around relaxation of IP, intellectual property rules around vaccine manufacturing, so that countries can manufacture vaccines. So this is, I think, a sticking point till now, and I don't expect that to suddenly evaporate between now and Thursday. So I think that's going to be the general context in which the summit takes place. So that's going to color what happens there. I hope I haven't been too gloomy, so I'm going to stop there.
No, that was great. It was a good start. I think a good start of getting deeper into the discussion. And before really looking at different topics of the agenda of the summit, I would like to ask the politician here in our round again, Dr. Hoffmann. You are now part of the government, as a member of the Liberal Party in the Deutschen Bundestag, you are part of the government, of the new government. And what is Germany's strategic view on Africa, and how is it related to Europe's strategy with Africa? Could you give us here some more insights, and then we go into the topics of the summit and trying to discuss certain issues here.
I completely agree with Dr. Abimbola's assessment of the situation and the expectations towards the summit. So this was, I would push the 100% button. But if you look at the German politics, especially, we have a new government, we have a new coalition, we have a coalition treatment which we made within those three parties. And if you look at it, the interior policy is described on detail, down to working horses in the forests. But the geopolitics didn't find the way into it. And I'm not convinced so far that the foreign policy is very important for Germany. And I'm not sure if everyone in the parliament has already realized that. And because we cannot live alone, and we cannot live without the others around us. And German interior politics is good for polls, for votes, and so forth. And but in the long run, we need a geostrategy, and our geostrategy is always Europe. And so the European relationship with Africa is important. So we need to have more leverage when we give a lot more power to the European level. When it comes to foreign aid, when it comes to foreign policy, we need to adapt this situation in Europe. And as you see, and as you said, and as you criticize, the European Commission is not that functional. It takes a long time to get something, and it's not clear who does what. And so it's very difficult to find a way also for foreigners to find their way through who is really in charge of what. And so I think Europe has to make his homework on that. That is very clear, and hopefully we can stay together. And I mean, Britain has left, so the European Union is not at a good state at this moment. And but hopefully we have a new crisis in Ukraine, which unites us a little more now. This is a good development. But versus Africa, I think we should have a common policy as well, because this is very important also to overcome those colonial prejudices on both sides. And I think there is a chance to do so, and this would be a good outcome of a summit like that, that we have a new relation, as I said, for a family-oriented thing, that we need Africa, as I said, and hopefully a lot of politicians agree on that. And we have new topics. Like you said, COVID has made clear that we have to do something with our health policy, and we have to enable Africa for their own pharmaceutical productions. So this is something which I think can be achieved. And also we have this problem of climate change. We already have in Europe, we have 1.2, 1.3 degrees plus, and we're having 4 degrees plus in 2100 if we go on like this. And this would be devastating for all of us. So we need to deal with Africa, because like the Congo Basin, you have a big forest, and that is still there. And if we want that you don't touch it and don't tap the oil which is under the forest, we have to compensate this somehow. So this is the new drive for economic development as well, because there has to something happen. We have to solve the energy crisis, and we have to get out of the fossil fuels in every country, and we have to preserve what is left from nature. So this is a global approach, if you want. So, but as Africa is our neighbor, we have to deal with that in the first place.
Yes, let's have a closer look now at the different topics that will be at the top of the agenda of the AU-EU Summit. And we would like to start with peace and security, Ms. Tadesse. Often, peace and security is considered as a rather stable partnership compared to other topics, such as migration management, for example, between the AU and the EU. My first question would be, do you actually agree with that? And then secondly, the AU has recently faced several challenges, such as increasing political crisis and conflict in member states, the resurgence of unconstitutional changes in government, and on top the rising tensions between Mali and France, to name just a few. How do these challenges affect the AU-EU's partnership in the field of peace and security? And what role does the engagement of other global players such as Russia play in this field?
Yeah, I think I do agree with the notion that the peace and security partnership is perhaps more stable than other portfolios of the partnership, but with the emphasis that this is just comparative. In a sense, when you compare the peace and security partnership and the common denominator, so the convergences there vis-a-vis migration, where the agreement is actually that there are diverging interests there, the peace and security partnership, I guess, has functioned relatively, by and large, relatively well than the other topics of the partnership. Having said that, indeed, some of the political dynamics in the continent and some of the political dynamics in Europe as well, and some of the political or geopolitical occurrences globally have influenced how number one, how the African Union also, identifies its role and itself in the continent, how the EU also wants to identify its role vis-a-vis Africa, but also vis-a-vis the rest of its competitors or the rest of the world, let's say. And at the same time, these are also dynamics that could shape the nature of the partnership going forward as well. As you mentioned, unconstitutional change of government have been, and also constitutional manipulation, I think these two need to be seen in tandem, have been an occurrence and relentless occurrence in the past few years in the African continent. And I think that is one area, perhaps putting it under the umbrella of the governance deficit or accountability deficit in the African continent, that is definitely an area that the African Union itself needs to revisit its principles, needs to revisit its enforcement mechanisms, because there's a lot written and agreed by AU member states that unconstitutional change of government, for example, are completely to be rejected and unacceptable. But when it comes to enforcement, there are so many dynamics at play that make it difficult for the AU to consistently enforce this principle. One of these dynamics, for example, is in some of these countries, populations were completely frustrated by civilian governments, that they were actually relieved or hopeful that the military takeovers could potentially change things for the better. So this again puts the question back to African member states, and it brings the question back to the governance and accountability deficit in the continent. Now, having underscored the fact that this is largely, at least in my view, an African homework or an African issue that needs the AU and African member states to push things forward, I think the agency is largely there. I think this has implications for peace and security for the continent, and as well has implications for peace and security in the partnership as well. And there we do note that part of the peace and security partnership also covers governance, or part of the EU Africa partnership includes democratic governance and accountability. So that is part of the pillars of the partnership. However, that was also the pillar of the partnership where there had been several debates and questions around reciprocity, and both sides having agreed to the need for democracy, both sides having agreed on the needs for citizen participation, freedom of speech. A lot of these ideals, they were uncomfortable, or the African side had complained, for example, that this values conversation has turned out to be an EU policing, an EU values policing vis-a-vis African actors, and that you don't see the reverse on the other side. So putting together the fact that These dynamics are happening in the African continent, are relevant for the EU-Africa partnership, but there's also a bit of baggage there around reciprocity and the fact that EU's values haven't also been consistently applied, things like that, and African states increasingly asserting sovereignty, both out of convenience, but also because that is the nature of statehood and that is the nature of agency. I wonder the extent to which these dynamics in the Sahel or in Mali would be part of the conversation at the summit. I do have my questions. I don't know the extent to which African countries would open up that conversation to make it an EU-Africa conversation versus an intra-African conversation, or even a Mali and France conversation. You could see side dialogues there, and I think that would also be positive. And on the peace and security portfolio anyways, there are topics like the European Peace Facility that are more at the continental level that also merits attention. So me personally, I'm actually looking forward to what they come up with and how they balance the EPF discussion with dynamics that are happening in the African continent. And you have, as part of your question, asked me something around external actors being also taking a peace and security role in the continent, and perhaps the Russian ones also being, headline news these days. I think the way I see it, one of the key challenges of the continent right now is international interference in African conflicts, or maybe to frame it differently, the internationalization of conflicts in Africa. So it's not just the Russians, but in the Horn of Africa, you have other actors. In the Sahel, you have other actors, including European member states. So we shouldn't also we shouldn't see Russia, Turkey, and the Gulf as external, whereas the European actors are sort of family or internal. I think all of them are external actors, the way the continent should view it. And I think this is time is of essence for the African Union to define what its role should be there, and what the role of external actors should be. Of course, in maintaining peace and security, pretty much, many African states are going to need security partnerships with other actors, be it their neighbors or be it actors in Europe, in Asia, or elsewhere. I think the main issue here is, how do you strike, especially when you are a weak government, how do you strike a security partnership without undermining your sovereignty and without getting into a situation in which it's other actors that actually tell you who can come in and who can't come in? And I think the Malian complaint, and one that, at the continental level should be had, a conversation that should be had, is around private security actors. Of course, this is not a new topic. Private security actors have been operating in the continent as elsewhere. And who gets to decide on which private security actors could operate where? Should that be the responsibility of the state at hand? Should that be part of the, your security partnership with other actors like France and the EU? And how do you combine all of these things? Your need for security and support therein, your responsibility to assert sovereignty as a state, and your responsibility towards your citizens to deliver on security, but also your responsibility towards global conventions around mercenaries, for example, or other global conventions. And I think the difficulty there is there are different ideas on what is legitimate and what's not legitimate. And I think that is one of the breaking points between Mali and France. But yeah, I have questions as to how much that will be discussed in the summit.
Allow me one additional question here. What do you think on what should be done? Will or should the European Union maintain its military presence in the Sahel? This is, I think, a crucial question here. And maybe also Dr. Abimbola and Christoph might also give us their impression on that question.
Yeah, my take here is that military operations, be it European or EU member states, should, of course, only be there when invited, and in ways that serve or in ways where the nexus between European interests and African interests align. So I think, in as long as the EU, number one, negotiates with the respective African member states on what the purpose and objective of the military presence are, because there's also, at least there's a perception, okay? Is it real, is it not, is another conversation, but there's a perception from the population that these military operations are happening to curtail migration and not necessarily to deliver on security. And that's where the frustration comes from. So that needs to be investigated. And then secondly, and going forward, because this is important going forward, the EU is also changing its modality of providing security assistance in African countries. For that, I think there needs to be a critical discussion among EU stakeholders on the risks associated with providing security support in fragile contexts, where the legitimacy of the state is questioned, and where there are several interests, regional interests, local interests, where the political economy dynamics are so complex, and that the EU may not have a sound understanding of the complexities and the interests of the actors. I think there needs to be a critical analysis of this, because the EU going forward could also find itself a party to political crisis, inadvertently, or a party to conflict, even violent conflict, even contributing party to it. So I think in how the EPF will be operationalized in the future, I do think there needs to be a critical discussion and perhaps some requirements and conditions under which the EU will provide support and where it would end.
Thank you. Maybe the other panelists also with an impression on that.
I mean, I fully agree with what you said. I think, and I would just add to that, also the scope of the military support should be clear, and also to know at what point the population don't want it anymore. Not just that the government doesn't want it, or that the government wants it and the population doesn't want it, but having a way to gauge just how much welcome an external actor in a country is after a certain period of time. That would be really important, because at this point, it's not very clear when this ends, right? It's not very clear what success is anymore. It's not very clear what the people are expecting even to get out of this. And I'm not even sure that Europe is clear what it's going to get out of this. So I think if all of those are clearly defined, then it's easy to say, okay, well, an external party can come in, and as long as those conditions have been fulfilled, then they can leave. But if that's not clear, and of course we know that things weren't that easy to sort of analyze when it all started. But now that we've learned, maybe in future we can be very careful in sort of figuring out under which conditions and what mandates, how long, when does it change, when does it end? All of those would have to come in future, hopefully.
I can add some more thoughts if you want to. If we look at the situation in Mali, where it all began, this was a failed state of Libya. This was the beginning, because there was a lot of small guns, weapons, which was sort of distributed throughout the Sahel. And so this was the beginning. And then we have, on the other hand, we have this poverty cycle, bad health, poverty, and then you have guns. So this is a vicious cycle. And so the discussion now is more focused on where the military can intervene and so forth. I think this is too short. We should really focus on development. Development is the key for peace also in this area. I mean, if you have good food every day, if you have a job, you don't shoot around. So this is the key. And European countries should focus on that. Of course, we have to deliver security. And the Malians were always asking for more security. And the Europeans didn't really respond to that because they said, okay, you should do it yourself. And Europeans don't like scratches, to be clear. I mean, the Russians, they don't care about scratches. If there is a Russian soldier on the field, there's no big fuss. If there is a wounded German soldier on the field, there's a big fuss. I mean, this is a different approach. So I think health is important, but we should not focus on the military. We should focus on the civil society, to improve civil society, improve the livelihood of people, and that will bring peace to us. But nevertheless, for this situation now, I think the UN mission MINUSMA has to stay in Mali and should be supported and should be even stronger than it was. So I think we should stay with that. And of course, the UN mission also needs some sort of protection. The French have given some protection with the Barkhane mission, and that will stop. I mean, France has said that they are going to pull out. And so there will be a vacuum if not another European country will fill it up. And so this is also a decision and question for Germany if we want to fill up this vacuum being left over by France. And of course, I understand the Malian regime that they're not satisfied with the information they get from the French military. So their operations with the military on the ground have difficulties not having all the information, the intelligence, which they would need for a successful combat on the ground.
Yes, thank you very much. Let's look at a different topic now that you already touched upon in previous inputs. That is the climate partnership. And Dr. Abimbola, you are working on the impact of the European Green Deal on the African continent. And we have heard how important it is that Europe and Africa work together in this regard, but the European Green Deal is actually a bone of contention. Can you maybe tell us what is the biggest challenge here and how can there be consensus, or how can there be a sustainable solution to this?
Yes, thank you. I mean, those of us who look at climate change, we look at security with envy because that gets a lot of space, but climate change doesn't get that much. And it's a bit of a shame because I think climate change is a security issue. I think we know this by now. It's sort of painful to have to repeat it, but it's a security issue. And climate change is sort of affecting African countries the way that it's currently not affecting Europe. I mean, if we look at the data, we can reel out the numbers and show just how bad droughts have been on the continent, just how bad flooding have been in the Sahel, just how bad, especially droughts in countries that depend overwhelmingly on rain-fed agriculture. I mean, that's a disaster, and things don't look very good moving forward. So it's sort of important to first acknowledge that. And that, I think, is where the consensus is that at least I think both sides know this, that there's an urgent need for action to address the climate emergency. That's clear. Now, the question is, how do we do it, and who pays for it? And how do we make sure that those who did not create the climate emergency do not end up bearing undue pain because others are trying to fix the problem on their side? I think that's where the EU Green Deal comes in. So, I mean, and that's also where the challenges sort of start showing up. On the challenges, it's a lot. So I'll just give you a few. I think Africans and African leaders and Africans in general feel that Europe doesn't seem to understand just how bad things are in Africa at this point. That they don't seem to understand how bad it is and understand the very peculiar situation that African countries are in. The biggest issue on the continent right now is to create jobs, right? The continent has young populations, and as Dr. Hoffmann said, we all know the volatility of having young populations without a perspective of what their life would be like in the future. So creating jobs is important. Industrialization, for that, we know that that's the path that countries have taken to develop and create jobs. It's industrialization. But then we also know that at this point, you can't industrialize on renewable energy sources, not yet, right? So, but instead of hearing the acknowledgement of all of this, African countries, when we were in Glasgow for COP26, we're hearing that Europe and European countries and other advanced economies decided that they were not going to be financing fossil fuel anymore, outside of their countries. which means including African countries. When, by the way, the largest share of export from Africa to Europe is still fossil fuel. That's a single episode. So imagine if that disappears, what happens to the countries that rely on that? But even beyond, just the export one, the local consumption, the need is there for energy sources. In many African countries, we're not talking about energy transition, we're talking about energy access, because there's nothing to transit from, right? You need to have something first to transit to something else. For many, it's just simple energy access, and without the energy access, you can't do the basic stuff of life. You can't have an economy that can create the kind of jobs that we need. So I think there is that feeling that Europe doesn't seem to understand that. I was watching an event in which I think for the first time I saw a president of an African president drop a little bit of the diplomacy and basically said, look, there is no way we will not need gas and that we will not need investment into gas because we just need it. It's as basic as, without that, what do we have, right? So I think there is that part that is sort of not very clear yet, not fully acknowledged. At least the feeling that Africans have is that Europe isn't acknowledging that, and acknowledging, by the way, that they didn't create the climate emergency in the first instance. So, and there's also the feeling that there's a progressive abandonment of the Paris Agreement principles, which is sort of the idea of common but differentiated responsibility. So, in other words, Europe should do more because Europe sort of developed on the back of emission, right? And Africa should maybe have a bit more time. And basically, to put it simply, that if there's a very little carbon budget left in the world, the countries that haven't done any emitting probably should be the ones that to have that, and not building a pipeline from Russia, right? Or relying a lot on Norwegian gas. So anyway, these are some of the issues that I think may be coming up in the summit. And other issues that I also see coming up include, just how much Africa might be able to think of Europe as an ally, right, in the issues that actually concern them in the climate process. So when you go, for example, to COP26, in COP26 and the COP process, Africans want to talk about loss and damage because, of course, they want to talk about loss and damage, but Europe will not back that, right? Africa wants to talk more about adaptation financing, right? About having more concessional loans and grants versus other forms of financing, but we're not seeing Europe kind of coming up and talking more about that. And Africa wants to, like I said, create jobs and build economies, and we're not seeing enough from Europe, actually saying anything about how that's going to work. All they're hearing is, don't worry, no gas for you. You will develop on renewable energy. And there's not even a clear path to the investments to that. I mean, Africa still attracts, I think, 2% of global investment into the renewable energy sector at this point. So, I mean, all of these are the challenges, and I think I'm not even sure that there's going to be enough space to have a full discussion about this. But I know that they introduced a new format now. There's a roundtable format in the summit. I know climate change and energy transition is going to be one of the topics that's discussed there. I wish I was in that room. I want to see how that actually happens, because I know that African countries have been making a very strong case about the use of gas, starting from Nigerian president and vice president last year. Malawian president wrote an op-ed, I think, in foreign policy. The Ugandan president wrote one. So I think, if there's one clear thing that we're beginning to see an African position around in climate change, it is around the need to have a bit more time with fossil fuel before that disappears.
Yeah, thank you very much. You have outlined a lot of challenges there, and I actually think that there are still so many more topics we could touch upon, which unfortunately we won't be able to do today. But you also said we need to see more from Europe, or Africans need to see more from Europe, and that's where Dr. Hoffmann, I would like to get you back in, because you already mentioned the Global Gateway Africa-Europe investment package of around 150 billion euros that the EU wants to launch now. And as one new thing that we are expecting at the summit. So In your view, is it enough for the more that Dr. Abimbola has been asking for? Is it enough for digital transition, sustainable growth, and decent jobs, and strengthening health systems and promoting education and training?
I mean, if you look at the 150 billion euros, I think it's quite an amount, but it's only the beginning. And you always have to keep in mind that public money is not the game changer. It's just something to start with. You need private investors. And if you don't lure the private investors, there is no hope for economic development. And so the framework for private investment is the most important thing, which could be really good in this perspective. Let me give you two more, just little examples where Europe could be more decisive and more faster. See, the city of Dakar in Senegal is fast growing, maybe 4 or 5% of population growth every year. So they need electricity, and they need it now. And what they did was they bought the cheapest coal power plant they could find. So they bought a used power plant from India. And this is a very dirty, of course, this is the worst you can buy. And I ask myself, why is Europe, having close relations with Senegal, not able to see these plans and make a different offer to avoid this mistake? Because in the long run, renewable energy in the Sahel or in Senegal, in the north of Senegal, you could have a lot of solar power there, or even wind power. We could avoid these things. And in the long run, the energy supply of these renewable sources would be much cheaper. So it would be cheaper, but the first investment is more than the used coal-fired plant. And if we could react faster and make a package and say, look, here is a package for a new power plant, which is in the long run cheaper than the thing you buy now. It's environmentally safe. And I think we need more practical approach, more decisive, more clearly oriented on these things. And if this is within the package, and also within the package, I think there is a new approach to infrastructure projects. But because in Africa, there's a lot of roads which are not existing or are in a bad shape, or we need much more roads within Africa, not just roads towards the coast for the export. So, but within Africa. And so this would really, I think it's a good beginning, but we need a lot of private investment, and the investment in industry and in small business will be rewarding, because then the government will have taxes, then they can build hospitals, and then they can give us all the social support the population needs. I think so. This is just the beginning, but to create the flow of private capital, this is the challenge, which is more important than the 150 billions, which is a good start, and of course a lot of public money, but this is just the beginning.
We take that for granted. This is a good point. One last question coming out of our alumni journalist circle, and it has been asked in the chat. I think it was Olumide who touched on the EU positions not being homogeneous, and this will also apply to the African Union member states as well. And the question is, and with the request for a really short answer to all of you, what, from your opinion, are the strong voices? Which are the strong voices on both sides, on the EU side and also on the AU side? Maybe, Tadesse, you might start.
Yeah, I think of course, there's diversity of interest, and I think in the African continent, it tends to be thematic. So whose interest it is, or who are the big actors pushing the agenda, tends to be thematic. These days you have, South Africa voicing quite a lot and participating quite a lot on vaccine negotiations or IR negotiations. and in peace and security in West Africa, you have actors like Nigeria, you have actors like Ethiopia who are sort of trying to bring the continent together vis-a-vis negotiations on presence at the UN Peace and Security Council. I think one of the challenges for the continent as well has been that while the asks vis-a-vis Europe are clear on a thematic basis, there's no coherent one go-to document where you see what African asks of Europe are. We don't have an African strategy on Europe. We don't have an African strategy on the EU, while we have so many EU strategies for Africa, be it thematic, be it regional, and things like that. And perhaps, going forward, that is one of the things that African states could also, in order to, ensure their strategic interests, not just thematic interests, but strategic interests are met. This is perhaps one thing that they need to work on, change from thematic interest to overall broader comprehensive strategic interests and asks vis-a-vis the European Union.
Thank you, Lidet, and maybe Dr. Hoffmann, and then Dr. Abimbola.
Well, this is a difficult question. Who are the big players? I mean, it depends on the region. In Western Africa, of course, France is still a big, a strong player and has a strong opinion on Western Africa and the Francophone area. And from the European side, but I think Germany should play a stronger role in that concern, because we don't have this burden of colonialism as strong as the other countries, and we have been giving aid or foreign cooperation for such a long time, 60 years, and it was sort of altruistic. It was not for minerals, it was not for anything business, it was altruistic, it was human. And this gives us a good reputation, and this was probably Germany could play a stronger role if they really want to.
Thank you, and Dr. Abimbola.
Okay, so I'm going to put on both European and African hats and answer a little bit for both sides. I think I would just echo what Dr. Hoffmann said, that I wish Germany would step up a little bit more in this space. It has its baggages, but the baggages are sort of a different kind. And I think we're beginning to see a reflection on those baggages. So I think it's probably well placed to step up and play a bigger role, in the relationship between Europe and Africa, and also just knowing also that Germany doesn't really have its own foreign policy. So if it's going to have a foreign policy towards Africa, and if it's going to always be pushing it and saying it's a European policy, then it should actually own it and do something in that space. I mean, that's my hope. And also, it's the biggest economy in Europe. It also needs, resources that African countries have. This is the point where articulating what Germany needs and what Germany and Europe needs, this is where it actually would be really helpful. On the African side, I also agree with what's been said about the countries. I think one other thing that we see is personalities also pushing things. So you have certain personalities on the continent, sometimes because of the countries that they lead, but also just because of their own force of character, playing big roles in these spaces. But just by the sheer size of economies, Nigeria, yes, definitely, and also half of the economy of West Africa is Nigeria. So it has a strong voice and a strong role to play. I mean, it's also historically been a peace sort of. When ECOMOG still existed, it was largely a Nigerian investment. South Africa on IP, actually in general on trade issues, has been really strong for a long while. So remember the TRIPS waiver thing was happening during the AIDS crisis. South Africa was one of the parties pushing for that. And what am I saying now? I mean, I'm beginning to see if Rwanda is also fairly present. You know, we should name them. Ethiopia has been mentioned. So, I mean, it's not, you don't have one big country that dominates the way that you have in Europe, dominates relationships. So you have, France is, you know, the country here for good or bad. But I wish Germany would step up and sort of own the space a bit more, because it can issue, it can afford to.
Yes, thank you very much. That was Africa Talks episode 18, towards a comprehensive strategy for Africa and the EU, challenges, expectations, and opportunities for the 6th AU-EU Summit. Thank you very much to all our panelists. Thank you for your very important insights and all your contributions. Thank you also, Marco Vollmer, for the nice cooperation, first-time cooperation between IGP and the German Africa Foundation.
Yeah, thank you also very much for your attendance from my side here. Many thanks to our speakers. Goodbye, take care, and at least stay healthy.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.